Perek Eizu Neshech, Daf Samachay, sponsored again, Refuah Shlema for Mordechai ben Roni. The Gemara begins with a machlokes how much a lender who charges RABBIS has to refund. The borrower preferred to pay the interest with wheat rather than cash. He gave the lender an additional bushel per dollar, assuming he owed $10, the market value being 4 bushels to the dollar. When the court compels him to refund the interest, Abaye holds the refund. He refunds the 4 bushels to the dollar. The additional bushel per dollar was a discount, not additional interest. Rava holds the lender must refund 5, the amount the lender received in lieu of their arrangement. If the borrower paid cash, the lender would refund only the original agreed interest payment. The Gemara discusses a machlokes for a refund of a stipulated cash payment of interest that was paid with a garment as opposed to cash. Abaye holds he refunds the cash, but not the garment, since he could have purchased the garment with the interest collected. Rava holds it is a chil Hashem for the lender to wear a garment people recognize as an interest payment. The next case is where the lender accepts a property rental as payment of interest. The borrower owed the lender $12. The property's market value as a rental is $10, but the lender accepted it for the full amount of interest he owes. He must refund $12. The lender cannot claim he agreed only when it was a profit, not a loss. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. One can increase a rental fee for a delayed payment, but one cannot increase the cost of a property purchased with a delayed payment. The difference is that a renter is not liable to pay rent until the end of the rental period. Therefore, the increase in price cannot be considered agar natar, interest to the owner for waiting for his money, since he was not entitled to it until the end of the rental contract. The increase in rent is the actual rental cost, whereas cash up front is a discount price. The source for this law is the verse Kischir Shana B'Shana. The extra word Shana refers to a Jewish slave's payment for his labor in the year after he finishes his work. However, a sale of a property or merchandise that the buyer must pay as soon as he takes possession, the price rise for a delayed payment is agar natar, interest for waiting. Cases where a tarsha, a sale with credit, is permissible. Number 1, if the seller mentions only the price of the credit purchase and not the discount for cash, it is permissible even though both the seller and buyer know the price is higher because the seller is extending credit. Number 2, Rav Papa holds his beer in Tishrei when he sold his beer in Tishrei when the price was cheaper on credit for payment in Nisan, for the higher price of Nisan. His rationale was he could store the beer until Nisan and did not sell because he was in need of cash. He was favoring the buyers who needed beer in Tishrei who did not have cash to purchase it. Rav Sheshes argued, although there is no agar natar for a papa, but the buyers are losing because they cannot purchase at the current cheaper price. According to Rav Sheshes, selling for a higher than the current price is forbidden. Number 3, Rav Chama gave merchandise on consignment for a higher price than it could have been sold locally, but saleable for the higher price elsewhere. It is different than Rav Papa's case because he initially assumed responsibility for the merchandise, making the recipients agents more than buyers. The money they eventually owed him was not agar natar because he did not sell them anything on credit. The famous Heter Isko allows this arrangement with cash as well. In addition, the Chacham did not consider the loan as remuneration for their services. As agents of Talmud Chacham, they received other privileges such as tax exemptions and trade considerations that paid for their services. Now, halacha follows Rav Chama, also Rabbi Elazar, that the court compels one to refund only ribbis ketzutza, and Rabbi Yanai that forward contracts may be substituted with other commodities at delivery. Now we move on to another Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the purchase of a property with a down payment. In a case where a down payment was made for the property, but retroactive acquisition by the buyer is conditional on payment of the balance at any time, the sale is forbidden. The reason is it is unclear who owns the field in the interim. If the seller consumes the produce and the buyer pays the balance, the produce the seller consumed is agar natar. If the buyer defaults on the balance, the down payment becomes a loan. So if the buyer consumed produce for the use of his money, it is ribbis. Either way, there is a potential for ribbis. The Gemara questions if the balance had to be paid by a specific date, who consumes the produce? Rav Huna holds the seller. Rav Anan holds it is held in escrow. The Gemara claims there is no argument. Rav Huna is discussing a case when the buyer pays the balance, he takes possession at that time. So until then, it belongs to the seller. Rav Anan is discussing a case of retroactive acquisition by the buyer. Rav Safra taught a brisa. Number 1, Pamim Shneim Mutarim. The seller states the buyer acquires what he paid for. Each one can consume what he owns. Number 2, Pamim Shneim Asurim. That's the case that we discussed previously. The seller stipulated when the buyer pays the balance, he acquires retroactively. This follows the Chachamim that tzad echad b'ribis aser, Rabbi Yehuda permits contingent interest. Number 3, pamim mocher mutter lokeach aser. The seller stipulates the buyer acquires when he pays the balance of the payment. Until then, it is the seller's. So the seller can consume until that point. Number 4, pamim lokeach mutter mocher aser. Sometimes the buyer himself can consume and not the seller. The seller stipulates the buyer takes possession with the down payment and the balance is a loan owed to the seller. The Gemara next discusses a lender that receives a house or field as collateral and wants first rights of purchase for the collateral. He can stipulate this as long as it is not a reduced price. This again does not follow Rabbi Yehuda that holds tzad echad b'ribis mutter, because the borrower may decide not to sell and there will be no ribis.